In the sweltering summer of 1928, a demolition crew in Baltimore was tasked with erasing a stain from the city's memory. The St. Jude's Foundling home, a fortress of faith that had stood for half a century, was being razed to the ground. For 40 years, from 1885 to 1925, it had been a place of last resort for the city's unwanted children. When the crew broke through the foundation into the long flooded basement, they were met with the smell of stagnant water and primordial rot. In the center of the subterranean chamber, half submerged in the black fetid water, sat a cast-iron safe, rusted but intact. After hours of work, they pried open its swollen door. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and miraculously preserved, was a single, heavy, leather-bound volume. It was the orphanage's burial ledger. Page after page listed the names of children who had succumbed to the hardships of the era: consumption, influenza, scarlet fever. Over 40 years, the ledger recorded the deaths of 312 souls. A tragedy, but in an age of rampant disease, not an unthinkable one. But when a curious city clerk later cross-referenced the ledger with the municipal registrar, he uncovered a truth so monstrous it defied comprehension. 312 deaths recorded, 29 burial plots purchased. Of the 312 children officially buried by St. Jude's, only 29 were actually in the ground. The other 283 had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Their names were in the book, their deaths were certified, but their bodies were gone. The ledger, it turned out, was not a record of sorrow. It was a receipt book for the damned. This channel isn't for everyone, only for those brave enough to face the darkest corners of American history. If you're ready to hear stories that others dare not tell, stories that will make you question what really happened in the shadows of our past, then subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. And I'm curious, from which state are you listening to this story? Leave a comment below telling us your location. To understand the evil that took root at St. Jude's, you must first understand the world that built it. The Baltimore of the Gilded Age was a city of stark, brutal contrasts. While industrialists and shipping magnates built opulent mansions in Mount Vernon, a stone's throw away, tens of thousands lived in squalor. It was a city of steel, steam, and staggering inequality. The air was thick with coal smoke and the constant, deafening clang of industry, a symphony of progress for the rich, a death knell for the poor. And in this crucible of desperation, children were the most vulnerable currency. Orphaned by industrial accidents, abandoned by destitute parents, or born out of wedlock, they were ghosts in their own lives. They filled the gutters and back alleys, invisible to a society that saw them as a blight, a problem to be managed. Into this void stepped the church, and with it, St. Jude's Foundling home. Opened in 1885, it presented itself as a divine sanctuary, a Gothic revival fortress of red brick and granite. Its spires reached towards heaven as if to physically pull the unfortunate from the mud below. To the public, to the city's benefactors, St. Jude's was a testament to Christian charity. It was a clean, orderly, and pious institution dedicated to saving souls. But whether it was a sanctuary or a prison depended entirely on which side of its locked gates you stood. The absolute authority within these walls was Mother Elizabeth, a woman who had arrived at the orphanage in its infancy and, through sheer force of will, ascended to the role of Mother Superior. Publicly, she was a figure of reverence. She spoke in Scripture, her voice a low, steady hum of piety. She was renowned for her fiscal prudence, stretching every donated dollar, making St. Jude's a model of self-sufficiency. She was trusted implicitly by the diocese and the city's elite. They saw a shepherdess. They should have seen a wolf. The camera pans from Mother Elizabeth's photo to a portrait of a well-dressed man from the same era. He is handsome, with a manicured mustache and a confident, almost arrogant gaze. But Mother Elizabeth was not alone. Her ambition required a partner in the secular world, someone who could lend the veneer of legitimacy to her machinations. She found that partner in Dr. Alistair Finch. Dr. Finch was everything a Gilded Age physician was supposed to be: respected, educated at Johns Hopkins, with a thriving practice on a fashionable downtown street. His brass nameplate gleamed. His waiting room was filled with the city's well-to-do. He was a man of science and society, a pillar of the community who served on hospital boards and donated generously to public causes. He was also a man with an insatiable greed and a chilling lack of conscience, hidden behind a carefully constructed veneer of compassion. The scene shifts to a stylized reenactment. A hand, representing Mother Elizabeth's, places the large ledger on a dark wooden desk. Another hand, Dr. Finch's, places a medical bag next to it. Together, they forged an unholy partnership. The scheme, in its initial form, was born of cold, calculating opportunism. In the late 19th century, a new financial instrument was gaining popularity: industrial insurance, small life insurance policies for the working class. For a few pennies a week, even the poorest families could ensure a proper burial. Charitable organizations, acting as legal guardians, could also take out these policies on their wards. The system was terrifying in its simplicity. When a child entered St. Jude's, Mother Elizabeth's first act was not to offer a prayer, but to begin the paperwork. The child became an asset. A modest life insurance policy was taken out, its premiums paid from the orphanage's own charitable donations. Dr. Finch, who made regular charitable visits to the orphanage, would provide the medical examinations, his signature giving the policies an unimpeachable air of legitimacy. The reenactment shows Dr. Finch's hand signing a document with a flourish. Mother Elizabeth's hand pushes a small stack of coins across the desk. At first, they waited. Child mortality was high, and it wasn't long before a child would genuinely succumb to illness. When that happened, Dr. Finch would sign the death certificate, Mother Elizabeth would file the claim, and the insurance company would pay out a modest sum, perhaps $40 or $50, a significant amount at the time. The child would be given a pauper's burial in one of the 29 plots the orphanage actually owned, but the ledger reveals the moment the scheme turned from passive and opportunistic to active and predatory. Next to the names of the dead, Mother Elizabeth began to make her own cryptic notations in the margins, a secret accounting of her sin. The camera pushes in tight on a page of the ledger. We can clearly see a fictional entry: Mary Catherine O'Malley, age 7. Admitted June 1891. Cause: influenza. Policy number 38G. Payout: $45. Finch, $12. Net, $33. This was the ledger of lost souls. It wasn't just a list of the dead. It was a business document, a meticulous record of profit extracted from human suffering. The pair soon realized that waiting for God to claim their assets was inefficient. The true profits lay not in chance, but in certainty. The demand from the factories was endless, and the supply of children within their walls was captive. The question they asked themselves was not if a child would die, but how that death could be made most profitable. St. Jude's was about to become a factory in its own right, its product not textiles or steel, but death. And for decades, no one would notice. The screams of the children were drowned out by the roar of the city, and their disappearances were hidden behind a mask of piety and the unshakable trust the world had placed in a holy woman and a healing man. Waiting for God to claim their assets, as Mother Elizabeth saw it, was inefficient. The cash flow was inconsistent, the profits unreliable, and on the industrial outskirts of Baltimore, a new, far more dependable machine was hungry: the factory, the textile mills, the canneries, the glassworks. They were engines of immense wealth, but they ran on a diet of human bodies. They consumed men, women, and, most cheaply of all, children, replaced by grim archival photos of child laborers. A small boy, his face smudged with grease, stands barefoot next to a massive piece of machinery. A young girl, no older than 9, stares blankly at the camera from her post at a huge textile loom. Here, Mother Elizabeth and Dr. Finch perfected their horrifying calculus. Here, the scheme escalated from passive fraud to an active, industrialized system of human trafficking and murder. They no longer waited for children to die. They sent them to be killed. They called it charitable indenture, a way for the older, stronger orphans to learn a trade and contribute to the home that saved them. It was a lie coded in the language of virtue. A reenactment scene begins. Mother Elizabeth sits behind her large oak desk. A rough, heavy-set man in work clothes, a factory foreman, stands before her, his hat in his hands. But his posture is not one of reverence, but of business. Internal records, pieced together from fragments of correspondence found years later, suggest these transactions were cold, simple, and utterly devoid of humanity. A foreman from a nearby textile mill would arrive not at the front door, but at a discreet side entrance typically used for deliveries. He wouldn't ask for an orphan. He would place an order. The reenactment shows the foreman laying a few crumpled bills on the desk. Mother Elizabeth doesn't touch the money. She simply nods. "I need 2 more, he might say. Small ones, for the looms. The last one got his sleeve caught." And Mother Elizabeth, a crucifix hanging on the wall behind her, would consult not a roster of children, but a mental list of her assets. Who had no family left to ask questions? Who was defiant and needed to be made an example of? Who had been at St. Jude's the longest, their existence all but forgotten by the outside world? The scene shifts to the dark, cavernous dormitory of the orphanage at night. The only light is a single lantern held by a gaunt, silent figure, a groundskeeper named Silas, who was the only other soul complicit in the nightly routine. The chosen children were roused from their sleep, not with kindness, but with a firm hand on their shoulder. They were told they were being transferred to a special work program. They were led, shivering in the cold, out a back gate and into the waiting arms of the new industrial age. They were leased, like livestock, for a few dollars a month. The money went directly into a hidden account, managed by Mother Elizabeth. Dangerous factory interiors, whirring gears, pounding steam presses, the fiery maw of a furnace at a glassworks. The conditions were a death sentence. Children spent 12 hours a day in the deafening clatter of the mills, the air thick with cotton dust that filled their lungs, leading to the hacking cough of byssinosis or brown lung. They darted between dangerous, unguarded machines to replace bobbins. They hauled scalding molds and glassworks, their small hands covered in burns and cuts. They stood for hours in the cold, damp basements of canneries, shucking oysters until their fingers were raw and bleeding. They were underfed, overworked, and seen as utterly disposable. When the inevitable happened, a fall, a crushing injury, a fatal fever brought on by exhaustion and malnutrition, the protocol was swift and seamless. The child did not die at the factory. Officially, they were never there. Reenactment. The groundskeeper, Silas, pushes a handcart with a large, canvas-wrapped object on it through the back gate of St. Jude's in the dead of night. The body would be discreetly returned to the orphanage. It would be taken not to the morgue, but to a place the other children whispered about in terror, the quarantine ward on the 3rd floor. This wing was always kept locked. The children were told it was for those with highly contagious diseases. The truth was, it was a way station for the dead, a stage for the final act of their fraud. Dr. Finch, looking professional and somber, is shown entering the quarantine ward. He doesn't look at the small, still form on the cot. He simply goes to a small table. The next day, Dr. Alastair Finch would make an official visit. He would never examine the body. He didn't need to. He would stand in the hallway, make a note on his chart, and then, in his clean, elegant office downtown, he would sign a death certificate. The cause of death was always the same: consumption, influenza, pneumonia, diseases that were common, tragic, and, most importantly, raised no questions. The official records of Baltimore would show that another poor orphan had tragically passed away within the hallowed, caring walls of St. Jude's. The camera returns to the ledger. We see another entry being made, clear and precise. Thomas Dolan, age 11, admitted John 1899. Cause, consumption. Policy number 72C. Payout, $60. Finch, $18. Net, $40. Mother Elizabeth would file the insurance claim. The check would arrive a few weeks later, and Dr. Finch would receive his cut. But this created the final and most ghastly problem, the one that led to the discovery decades later: what to do with the bodies. The 29 burial plots were for the legitimate deaths, the ones that maintained the orphanage's tragic but believable mortality rate. They couldn't bury 312 children without raising alarms. The evidence had to be destroyed. St. Jude's Foundling home was heated by a massive coal-fired furnace in the basement, a furnace that burned day and night during the long, damp Baltimore winters. It had a large firebox, designed to take whole bushels of coal. It was also large enough to accommodate other things. The ledger of lost souls held the financial records, but the true register of their crimes was written in the ash and soot of that furnace. Under the cover of darkness, the small bodies from the quarantine ward were brought to the basement, and their existence was erased in fire and smoke. It was a perfect, self-contained engine of death and profit, hidden behind a facade of prayer and charity. For 40 years the cycle continued. A child would enter the front door, a soul to be saved. They would be catalogued, insured, and leased. Their life would be consumed by the gears of industry, and their body would be consumed by the flames in the basement. How many winters did the other children of St. Jude's huddle for warmth, never knowing the true, horrific source of the heat that kept them from freezing? They were living in a tomb, warmed by the ghosts of their vanished friends. An operation built on such a foundation of lies and ash cannot last forever. Cracks, however small, eventually appear. For 40 years, the victims of St. Jude's were silent. They were children with no one to speak for them, no one to notice their absence. Their voices were erased from the official record, their bodies from the earth itself. But the machine built by Mother Elizabeth and Dr. Finch made one critical miscalculation. It assumed every child was breakable. It assumed every memory could be erased. It never accounted for Rebecca Morrison. A grainy, sepia-toned photograph of a young girl, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, appears on screen. She isn't smiling. Her eyes are direct, intelligent, and carry a hint of defiance. She is not beautiful in the conventional sense, but striking. Rebecca arrived at St. Jude's in 1923, one of the last generations to pass through its doors before it was shuttered. She was not an orphan in the traditional sense. Her parents were alive, but they were destitute, ravaged by the Spanish flu's aftermath, and had sent her to St. Jude's under the belief it was a temporary, safe harbor, a place for her to receive an education and 3 square meals a day until they could get back on their feet. This one fact would later prove to be the linchpin of the entire investigation. Rebecca had a family that expected to see her again. From the moment she arrived, Rebecca was different. She was older, literate, and possessed a quiet, observational nature that Mother Elizabeth found immediately unsettling. She didn't cry or shrink away from the austere discipline of the home. She watched, she listened, and most importantly, she remembered. Reenactment. Rebecca, a young teenager, is shown sweeping the main hall. She watches as Mother Elizabeth has a low, hushed conversation with the groundskeeper, Silas, near the side door. Silas nods and disappears outside. Rebecca's eyes follow him, a flicker of curiosity and suspicion on her face. She remembered the names of the other girls in her dormitory. She remembered Sarah, a small, quiet girl with a talent for drawing birds. She remembered Daniel, a boy who boasted he could climb any tree in the courtyard. She noticed when one night Daniel was taken from his bed by Silas and never seen again. The next morning, Mother Elizabeth announced with a heavy heart that Daniel had succumbed to a sudden, virulent fever during the night. The other children cried. Rebecca watched Mother Elizabeth's eyes. She saw no grief. She saw only finality. She started to keep a secret record, not in a book. Books were forbidden possessions, but in her mind. She memorized the names: Sarah, Daniel, Joseph, Mariah. Little Emily, who had cried for her mother for 3 straight weeks before being led away to the quarantine ward for a terrible cough. Rebecca had seen Emily just hours before. She had no cough, the sound of a heavy iron key turning in a lock. The reenactment shows Rebecca, late at night, creeping through the darkened halls. She has managed to steal a master key from the laundry room. The turning point came on a cold autumn night. Fueled by a desperate need to understand, Rebecca risked a flogging. Or worse, she stole a key and made her way to the one place no child was ever allowed, the 3rd-floor quarantine ward. She expected to find sick children, rows of beds filled with the dying. Rebecca slowly pushes open the heavy door. The camera stays on her face as she reacts to what she sees. Her eyes widen in confusion, then in dawning horror. The room is not a ward. The wing was almost entirely empty. There were no sick children. There were no rows of beds. There were only 2 rooms. The first was a sparse office, containing a desk, a chair, and a cabinet. The second room contained nothing but a single stark metal cot and a floor with a large, dark stain near the center. The air was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of lye and something else, something metallic and vaguely sweet. This wasn't a place for the living. It was a place for processing the dead. A sudden, loud noise from downstairs startles Rebecca. She quickly pulls the door shut, her heart pounding. She scurries back to the dormitory just moments before she would have been discovered. That night, Rebecca Morrison understood. She didn't know the details of the insurance or the factories, but she knew the fundamental, terrible truth. The children weren't dying of sickness. They were disappearing. And St. Jude's was the place where the magic trick was performed. 2 weeks later, Rebecca's parents, having found work at a cannery on the eastern shore, arrived unannounced at St. Jude's to bring their daughter home. Mother Elizabeth was caught completely off guard. It was a rare, unforeseen complication. She met them at the door with a face etched in sorrow. Mother Elizabeth stands at the doorway, twisting a rosary in her hands. Rebecca's parents, their faces full of hope, slowly crumple in despair as she speaks. She told them a terrible tragedy had occurred. Rebecca, their dear, sweet Rebecca, had been struck down by a violent case of pneumonia just a week prior. It was so sudden, so aggressive, there was nothing anyone could do. She was buried, Mother Elizabeth assured them, with all the rites and prayers of the church, in the orphanage's private plot. She even offered to show them the freshly turned earth of the grave. It was a performance she had perfected over decades. But she underestimated the girl she claimed was dead. Just as Mother Elizabeth was delivering her practiced eulogy, Rebecca, who had been relegated to kitchen duty in the basement, heard her father's booming voice through an open grate. Realizing what was happening, that Mother Elizabeth was trying to erase her, a surge of adrenaline and terror propelled her into action. She burst from the kitchen, screaming for her parents. The reenactment shows the dramatic confrontation. Rebecca running into the main foyer, her parents' shocked faces, Mother Elizabeth's mask of piety shattering for a split second into a glare of pure, cold fury. For a moment, there was chaos. Rebecca's parents, overjoyed and utterly confused, embraced their daughter. Mother Elizabeth, recovering instantly, tried to spin a new lie, that this was a miracle, a divine recovery. But the damage was done. The Morrisons, seeing the terror in their daughter's eyes and the venom in the Mother Superior's, knew something was deeply wrong. They took Rebecca and left immediately, not looking back. They didn't go to the police. Who would believe a half-starved girl's frantic stories against a woman as respected as Mother Elizabeth? Instead, they simply vanished, content to have their daughter back. But Rebecca Morrison never forgot. She carried the names of the lost children with her. For years, her story was just a whispered, unbelievable tale of a haunted orphanage. No one knew that she was the first crack in the dam, the living ghost who had escaped the ledger. The machine at St. Jude's ran for 2 more years, but its time was short. The world was changing, and the secrets buried in its foundation were about to be unearthed by the unlikeliest of investigators. Just when everything seems to be coming to a head in this terrifying tale of St. Jude's Foundling home, I want to pause for a moment. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. The truth about what happened next is even more shocking than what we've uncovered so far. Let's discover together how this house of horrors finally came crashing down. Rebecca Morrison's escape was a tremor, a warning that Mother Elizabeth chose to ignore. For 2 more years, she and Dr. Finch continued their gruesome enterprise, convinced they were untouchable. But the world outside the stone walls of St. Jude's was changing. The freewheeling corruption of the Gilded Age was slowly giving way to the bureaucracy and oversight of the 20th century. Institutions that had long operated as private fiefdoms were now being subjected to a new, uncomfortable level of scrutiny. In 1925, the Archdiocese of Baltimore, facing financial pressures of its own and seeking to modernize its operations, dispatched a man to review the books of all its charitable institutions. He was not a priest or a bishop. He was something far more dangerous to Mother Elizabeth's world. He was an accountant. A photograph appears of a man in his late 40s. He is unassuming, with spectacles, thinning hair, and a neat but simple suit. He looks more like a clerk than a hero. This is Thomas Jefferson Randolph. His name was Thomas Jefferson Randolph, a name that evoked revolutionary ideals, but a man who embodied quiet, methodical precision. Randolph was not a crusader. He was a man of numbers. He believed that ledgers and balance sheets told a story more honest than any sermon. He was dispatched to St. Jude's on a routine audit, expected to spend a few days confirming donations, cataloging expenses, and ensuring the orphanage was, as everyone believed, a model of fiscal responsibility. He was expected to find order. He found an abyss. Reenactment. Randolph is sitting at a small, rickety desk provided for him in a cold side office at St. Jude's. Mother Elizabeth hovers nearby, her presence a constant, oppressive weight. She is polite, but her eyes are watchful. From the beginning, Randolph was met with a wall of pious obstruction. Mother Elizabeth was condescending, treating his questions as a worldly intrusion into God's work. "Mr. Randolph," she would say, her voice smooth as oil, "our true ledger is kept in heaven. We deal in the currency of souls, not dollars and cents." But Randolph was persistent. He wanted to see everything: the donation logs, the expense receipts, the food and coal delivery invoices. He started to notice small, unsettling inconsistencies. The orphanage received substantial donations of food and clothing, yet the receipts for supplemental purchases were unusually high. The invoices for coal were astronomical, even for a building of its size, as if the furnace ran at full blast not just in winter, but through the spring and autumn months as well. These were whispers of inefficiency, not yet cries of criminality. Randolph is shown working late into the night. The room is dark except for his desk lamp. He has multiple ledgers open, comparing them. He runs his finger down a column of figures, then stops. He frowns, his brow furrowed in concentration. The first true alarm bell rang when he examined the accounts for indigent burials. Over 40 years, the orphanage had recorded expenses for only 29 burials, a remarkably low number. He cross-referenced this with a separate log he'd found, a small notebook, detailing payments to a local undertaker. It matched perfectly. 29 burials. 29 payments. But where was the official record of deaths? Mother Elizabeth claimed there was no single document, that such things were recorded in the parish register, mixed in with births and baptisms. It was a lie, and a clumsy one. Randolph knew an institution of this size had to have its own internal mortality register. It was a matter of basic administration. He pressed her. For days, she deflected and denied. Finally, cornered by his quiet, relentless logic, she made a fatal error. Believing him to be a fool she could manipulate, she decided to show him the proof of her supposed tragedy. She retrieved the iron safe key from her office. She led him to the basement. She gave him the ledger of lost souls. Mother Elizabeth stands with a smug, sorrowful expression as she hands the heavy ledger to Randolph. She believes the sheer number of deaths will overwhelm him with pity and end his financial inquiries. "Here is our true, sad accounting, Mr. Randolph," she said, her voice dripping with false grief. "Page after page of God's little lambs, taken from us by sickness. You will find no profit here, only heartbreak." She left him alone in the damp, cold basement, confident that the book would satisfy his morbid curiosity. The camera focuses on Randolph's face as he opens the book. He reads the first few pages, his expression somber. Then he starts to notice the notations in the margins, the strange numbers, the cryptic abbreviations. Finch. Net. Randolph was an accountant. He didn't see names. He saw entries in a double-entry system of horror. On one side of the page was a debit, a child's life, and in the margin, next to the name, was a credit, a cash value. The payout, the share for Finch, the net profit for the orphanage. It wasn't a burial ledger, it was a balance sheet. His blood ran cold. He quickly did the math. 312 names. He knew from the expense reports there were only 29 burials. Where were the others? The number haunted him. 283. He looked around the damp basement, his eyes falling on the monstrous coal furnace. He remembered the inexplicable fuel bills, and a sickening hypothesis began to form in his mind. A truth so vile, he could barely allow himself to think it. Randolph is shown hastily and secretly copying names and numbers from the ledger into his own small notebook. He hears footsteps approaching and quickly shoves the ledger back onto the table. He knew he was in mortal danger. This book was the key, and Mother Elizabeth would never let it leave the grounds. He spent the next hour frantically transcribing names, dates, and, most importantly, the financial data from the margins. He focused on the most recent entries, names from the last decade, names he might be able to trace. When Mother Elizabeth returned, he handed the ledger back to her, his face a mask of professional sympathy. "It is a great tragedy, Mother Superior," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Your records are in order." He packed his briefcase and left St. Jude's that afternoon, walking out the front gate into the sunlight, carrying a secret that felt like a physical weight. He didn't go back to the archdiocese. He didn't go to the police. Not yet. He had the what? He had the who. Mother Elizabeth and the mysterious Finch. But he didn't have the how. He had a list of 283 vanished children and a ghastly theory. He needed proof. He needed to find just one person who could corroborate the impossible story the numbers were telling him. He needed to find a body, or, failing that, a ghost. He had no idea that a living ghost, a girl named Rebecca Morrison, was out there, waiting for someone to finally listen. The hunt for the truth had begun. The scene opens with a montage of Thomas Jefferson Randolph at work. He's in a small, cluttered apartment, lit by a single desk lamp. The walls are covered with papers tacked to the wall, lists of names, dates, maps of Baltimore. He's poring over city directories, census records, and old newspapers on microfilm. The feel is one of obsessive, solitary investigation. Thomas Randolph was a man transformed. The quiet accountant had become a hunter, haunted by the numbers he had transcribed. 283. The number was a brand on his soul. He worked feverishly, in secret, using his own time and money. He knew he couldn't trust the authorities. Not yet. Mother Elizabeth and her mysterious partner, Finch, were powerful, respected figures. A premature accusation without irrefutable proof would be dismissed as the ravings of a madman. He would be ruined, and the truth would be buried forever. His strategy was methodical. He started with the names from the ledger's final years, hoping to find a family, a relative, anyone who remembered a child sent to St. Jude's who never came home. He cross-referenced the names with city birth records and census data, a painstaking process in a pre-digital age. Name after name led to a dead end. Families had moved, parents had died. The transient, impoverished nature of the victims' families was the very thing that made them such perfect targets. They were people designed to be forgotten. Randolph is shown looking frustrated, rubbing his temples. He stares at the list of names. His finger stops on one. Rebecca Morrison, admitted 1923. But then he found it, an anomaly. Next to the name Rebecca Morrison, Mother Elizabeth's ledger had a frantic, almost illegible notation unlike any other. It didn't list a payout or a cause of death. It just said, complication, parents reclaimed. It was the only entry of its kind in 40 years of meticulous, bloody accounting. It was a record of a failure, a loose thread. Randolph focused all his energy on finding the Morrisons. He searched city directories for 1923, 1924, 1925. Nothing. He guessed they might have left the city, scared off by whatever they had witnessed. He expanded his search, writing letters to county clerks across Maryland, a shot in the dark. Weeks turned into a month. His obsession was isolating him, his superiors at the archdiocese questioning his prolonged review. The scene shifts to a modest working-class home. Rebecca Morrison, now a young woman of about 18, is helping her mother mend clothes. She is still quiet, but her face has a maturity and a lingering sadness. Meanwhile, 60 miles away in a small fishing town on the Chesapeake Bay, Rebecca Morrison was living a life of quiet survival. She had never spoken in detail about what happened at St. Jude's. The memories were a constant, cold weight in her chest. The names she had memorized, Sarah, Daniel, Joseph, were ghosts that visited her in her sleep. To her family, she was the girl who had miraculously survived a terrible illness. To herself, she was a witness to a massacre, her testimony locked away by fear and the certainty that no one would ever believe her. A letter with an official-looking return address from Baltimore is delivered to the Morrison house. Rebecca's father opens it, looking puzzled. He calls Rebecca over. Then, the letter arrived. It was from Mr. Thomas Randolph, an auditor for the archdiocese. It was cautious, stating only that he was conducting a historical review of St. Jude's and was trying to contact former residents. He wrote that he had reason to believe Rebecca's experience at the home was of special interest. He asked if she would be willing to meet, to speak about her time there. Rebecca's face shows a cascade of emotions, fear, suspicion, but also a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. The scene cuts to Randolph, waiting nervously on a wooden pier. Rebecca approaches him, her father a protective presence a few feet behind her. The meeting took place on a windswept pier, away from prying ears. Randolph was gentle, his demeanor more like a worried father than a sharp-eyed investigator. He didn't start with accusations. He simply asked, "Can you tell me what you remember about the third floor?" And for the first time, the dam broke. Rebecca spoke. She told him about the locked quarantine ward that wasn't a ward. She told him about the metallic smell and the stained floor. She told him about the children who were taken away in the night. And she gave him the names, Sarah, Daniel, Joseph, names that Randolph immediately recognized from the ledger. names listed as having died of influenza and consumption. Rebecca's memories were the living testimony that gave context to his dead numbers. Randolph pulls out his small notebook and shows her the transcribed entries. Her eyes widen as she sees the names, and next to them, the financial notations. The pieces click into place for both of them. Randolph, in turn, showed her what he had found. He explained the insurance policies. He explained the notations. He explained his horrific theory about the furnace. For Rebecca, it was a moment of terrible vindication. She wasn't mad. It was real. For Randolph, Rebecca's story was the final crucial piece of evidence. The ghost had a voice. Now he had to identify the accomplice, Finch. With Rebecca's eyewitness accounts of the children's illnesses, Randolph had a new avenue to explore. He returned to Baltimore and went straight to the Municipal Health Department archives. He requested all the death certificates issued for St. Jude's Foundling home for the past 20 years. A montage of Randolph sifting through stacks of brittle, yellowed death certificates. The camera focuses on the signature line at the bottom of each one. Again and again, the same elegant, confident signature appears. The signature was a constant, on certificate after certificate, for deaths attributed to a dozen different diseases. The same hand had certified them all. Dr. Alistair Finch, the pillar of the community, the respected physician. Randolph now had the two heads of the serpent, a holy woman who traded in children, and a healing man who certified their deaths for profit. He finally had enough to go to the authorities, not to the local police, who he feared might be in Finch's pocket, but to a hard-nosed state prosecutor he knew from his church, a man with a reputation for fearing neither God nor man, only the truth. The confluence of ghosts and numbers was complete. The time for secrets was over. The time for reckoning had arrived. Randolph's notebook, a stack of death certificates signed by Finch, and a list of names handwritten by Rebecca Morrison. The storm was about to break over Baltimore. The only sound is the low hum of their engines. They are not police cars. They are unmarked vehicles carrying state prosecutors and investigators. They move with a quiet, purposeful menace. On October 12, 1928, 3 years after Thomas Randolph first set foot in St. Jude's, the reckoning began. The state prosecutor, armed with Randolph's meticulous research and a sworn affidavit from Rebecca Morrison, had secured a series of sealed warrants. It was a two-pronged attack, designed for maximum surprise, to prevent either suspect from destroying evidence or fleeing. A team of plain-clothes investigators approaches the grand, respectable townhouse of Dr. Alistair Finch. On the other, a second team, led by a stone-faced Randolph, arrives at the now shuttered and derelict gates of St. Jude's Foundling home. Dr. Finch was arrested over his morning coffee. The man who had built a career on projecting an aura of unimpeachable calm was rendered speechless as investigators presented him with the warrant. His hands, which had signed hundreds of fraudulent death certificates, trembled as they were cuffed behind his back. His office, a sanctuary of mahogany and leather, was turned upside down. They weren't looking for medical instruments. They were looking for financial records, insurance correspondence, anything that tied him to the orphanage. The scene cuts to St. Jude's. The gates are rusted shut. The investigators use bolt cutters to snap the heavy chain. The sound rings out like a gunshot in the morning stillness. Simultaneously, the team at St. Jude's forced its way onto the grounds. The building was a hollow shell, decaying since its closure 3 years prior. Windows were broken, and weeds choked the courtyard where children once played. Guided by Randolph, they didn't go to the chapel or the dormitories. They went straight to the heart of the operation, Mother Elizabeth's old office, the third-floor quarantine ward, and the basement. Reenactment of the raid. Investigators methodically search the office. They find a hidden compartment behind a loose brick in the fireplace, pulling out ledgers and bundles of cash. In the former Mother Superior's office, they found exactly what Randolph said they would: a hidden strongbox containing years of illicit financial records that documented the incoming insurance payments and the kickbacks to Dr. Finch. But the true horror awaited them on the third floor. The investigators, led by an anxious Randolph, kick open the door to the quarantine ward. The camera follows them in, showing the room as Rebecca described it: stark, empty, with the single metal cot and the ominous stain on the floorboards. The quarantine ward was just as Rebecca remembered. A forensic chemist, brought along for this specific purpose, took samples from the stained floorboards. The preliminary tests, conducted right there in the dusty, silent room, were positive for large quantities of human blood. Then they descended into the basement. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something acrid and ancient. The centerpiece of the room was the massive, silent furnace. It was cold now, its iron door rusted almost shut. Investigators use a crowbar to pry open the furnace door. A cloud of old soot and dust billows out. An investigator shines a powerful flashlight inside. An investigator leaned in, shining a light into its cavernous belly. At first, there was nothing but layers of ash and fused coal slag, known as clinker. But as they began to carefully scoop out the contents, sifting it through fine mesh screens, the sickening truth began to reveal itself. Small, metallic objects being washed in a tray of water. A small button from a child's shoe. A tiny metal crucifix, blackened by heat. And then, the undeniable evidence: fragments of bone. They found dozens of buttons, small buckles from shoes and overalls. They found a child's silver locket, fused shut by the intense heat. And then, mixed in with the ash, they found them: small calcified fragments of bone, a piece of a jaw, a shard of a rib, vertebrae. Because of the extreme, sustained heat required to burn coal, most of the organic matter had been vaporized, but some fragments, particularly teeth and the densest parts of bone, had survived. A forensic anthropologist on site confirmed their human origin, and their size indicated they belonged to children. The furnace was not a furnace. It was a crematorium. The scene cuts to an interrogation room. Mother Elizabeth sits opposite the prosecutor. She is older now, her face a web of wrinkles, but her eyes are still defiant and cold. She is dressed in simple lay clothes, her nun's habit gone. Mother Elizabeth, living in a quiet retirement home provided by the diocese, was arrested last. She showed no emotion, no remorse. In the interrogation, she remained steadfast, her faith and her crimes twisted into a single, monstrous ideology. Reenactment of the interrogation. The prosecutor lays out photos of the bone fragments, the ledger, Finch's confession. Prosecutor said, "We have Dr. Finch. He's confessed to everything. We have your ledgers. We have this. We found this in the furnace. We found 283 names. What do you have to say, Elizabeth?" Mother Elizabeth said, "I say you are a fool. You see sin, I see salvation. Those children were born into filth. They were destined for lives of poverty, crime, and damnation. Their souls were already lost. I gave their short, miserable lives a purpose." Prosecutor said, "A purpose? You sold them to factories. You murdered them for insurance money." Mother Elizabeth said, "The factories gave them discipline. Their passing provided the funds to save other, more worthy children. I took the weak, the defiant, the ones already touched by darkness, and I used them to create a sanctuary for the innocent. I repurposed them for God's work. Their ashes fed the fires that kept the pure warm. It was a form of transubstantiation, a holy and necessary sacrifice. I regret nothing." The trial of Mother Elizabeth and Dr. Alastair Finch was a national sensation. It was a trial that ripped the veil from a trusted institution and exposed the rot beneath. The courtroom was packed every day with horrified spectators and rabid journalists. The prosecution, led by the state's top attorney, laid out the case with chilling precision. Thomas Randolph was the star witness. his calm, methodical testimony walking the jury through the labyrinth of financial records, explaining how the ledger of lost souls was not a record of death, but a business plan. Dr. Finch, hoping for leniency, had turned state's evidence, his confession painting a damning portrait of Mother Elizabeth as the merciless architect of the entire scheme. But it was the testimony of Rebecca Morrison, her voice trembling but clear, that silenced the courtroom. She gave the numbers faces. She gave the ashes names. In the end, the jury took less than 4 hours to reach a verdict. Dr. Alistair Finch, for his cooperation, was convicted of 283 counts of fraud and accessory to murder, and was sentenced to life in prison. He would die of a heart attack in the Maryland penitentiary 15 years later, a reviled and broken man. Mother Elizabeth, unrepentant to the very end, was found guilty of 12 counts of first-degree murder for the children whose remains could be most concretely identified, as well as fraud and conspiracy. She was sentenced to death. However, due to endless appeals from religious groups who refused to believe her guilt and her advanced age, the sentence was never carried out. She died in a prison infirmary in 1935, still claiming she was a martyr who had done God's work. She never once expressed remorse. The aftermath was profound. The St. Jude's Foundling home case triggered a wave of reforms across the country. States began implementing stricter regulations and oversight for orphanages, asylums, and other charitable institutions. The insurance industry overhauled its policies regarding minors, making it nearly impossible for a guardian institution to profit from a child's death. The names of the 283 lost children were read into the public record, and a small, simple memorial was eventually erected in a Baltimore park, a stone angel weeping over a list of names. A slow pan across the fictional memorial, the names etched into the stone. The camera lingers on Sarah, Daniel, Joseph. But the legacy of St. Jude's is more than just a list of reforms or a sad monument. It's a chilling reminder of how easily evil can flourish behind a mask of virtue. It demonstrates how the most vulnerable can be preyed upon by those entrusted with their care, their screams silenced by the very walls meant to protect them. It's a story of institutional betrayal on a scale that is difficult to fathom. What do you think of this story? Do you believe that even today, powerful institutions can hide monstrous secrets behind a veneer of respectability? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The story of St. Jude's reminds us that the most terrifying monsters are not creatures of fantasy, but human beings who convince themselves that their cruelty is justified. If you found this investigation compelling and want to hear more stories about America's hidden criminal history, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and share this video with someone who appreciates the importance of uncovering buried truths. Until next time, remember that the most important stories are often the ones that powerful people hoped would never be told.